Hey folks, just want to give a shout out to my good friend Dominic Eagle, the author of tonight's story. Make sure to go check out his channel, Black Volumes, for more stories. Link will be in the description below. "200 years ago, British engineers built a self-sustaining city underground and sealed it. In September of 2024, this lost land was found. We shouldn't have opened its doors. The city of Provecta was designed between the years of 1829 and 1856. Its engineers, sorcerers of their time, worked outside the parameters of the public sphere, partly to protect the nation's advanced inventions from foreign eyes, but also to evade the righteous fists of the church and the state, to evade any who might decry the futuristic research. The above world, still grappling with the wizardry of rudimentary electric lights, would have marveled at Provecta's magic machines, water treatment systems, hydroponic farms, and above else, everlasting energy. A city below the soil, built to last should the world above not. After all, fears of war, famine, and society's collapse had started to spread across the globe. Provecta wasn't designed to be a safety net for mankind. It was designed for those wishing to escape from mankind. In 1857, a small total of 6,000 people disappeared into the ground, and the doors were closed for good. Classified information known only by few of the few, unlisted governmental arms with records of things that, in the public eye, are as good as naked. "I don't like him," Georgina Pendle whispered, voice half drowned by the crunches of many boots across the forest floor. "Well, best not to let him know you feel that way," I told my fellow engineering consultant, nervously eyeing Dr. Thomas Gregson ahead. Our research team approached a newly uncovered site, the city for which historians had spent decades tirelessly hunting, and I hardly believed any of it until I saw it for myself. Buried in the heart of a forest clearing were two steel doors, each several feet in depth, hidden beneath moss, dirt, and shed foliage from surrounding oaks. Doors that had been prized apart by a team that arrived before us. Dr. Gregson, the leader of the expedition, was enraged. "Why?" the man simply said, tone soft but firm. A man in a luminous jacket shrugged disinterestedly. "Director Blum said I was in the meeting with Director Blum," Gregson interrupted, a voice a little louder. "The doors were supposed to be opened under my supervision. It was all clearly specified." "With all due respect, Gregson," the jacketed man said, hands on his hips, "I don't work for your agency. Besides, you were late, and we were clearly contracted to start at noon. We started at 10 past. If we had delayed things any longer, we would have faced repercussions." Dr. Gregson scoffed. "Think critically, Mr. Hanley. There were issues with my transportation. You were informed as such, and you should have waited." Hanley, the jacketed man in his late 30s, simply shrugged a second time. He was the only member of the team who seemed unfazed by Gregson, the middle-aged scientist with narrow spectacles and a grey beard. Mr. Luminous Jacket and his squad of laborers didn't seem to understand the nature of the company for which Dr. Gregson worked. But I did. I knew to keep my mouth shut, seemingly frustrated by Henley's lack of response. Gregson barked. "You don't get it, do you? The site was disturbed an hour ago. Meanwhile, your lackeys were just sitting here, twiddling their thumbs. Exposure to the elements might have damaged artifacts. Might have." I frowned, doubtful that an hour of fresh air pouring through the open doors would have caused any problems whatsoever. In addition, I knew that Gregson knew that, which meant he was lying. Meant something else had disturbed them about Mr. Henley's early start. Through the parted metal doors, framing either side of a 20-meter wide hole in the dirt, a staircase slipped into the blackness below, disappeared into a void. Even with our torch beams shining upon it, I was thankful that Mr. Hanley and his laborers led the descent, as something about those steel steps left my teeth chattering. Steps 2 centuries old, as unbelievable as that seemed for a 19th century construction. We traveled 300 meters into the soil, dozens of boot soles pounding against steel, sending metallic clangs ricocheting off the walls of that unthinkably large space. 2,000 steps, which were remarkably intact. We'd already walked thousands of steps through the forest, so I knew my step tracker was on the verge of pinging triumphantly, letting me know I'd hit that daily goal. When the first of the laborers reached the floor below the final step, their torch beams revealed a tunnel ahead. It was the width of the staircase and the length of our torch beams. The edges of the glows scraped the end wall, 50 meters away. Scraped within that wall, a standard wooden door of standard dimensions, impossibly preserved, having seemingly been treated by some wonder layer. We scurried towards it eagerly, and arguments between team members fell by the wayside. Even the day laborers, who knew very little about the project, were ecstatic. The reality of the situation struck. The city was real. And there, on a surprisingly small slab of stone, fixed to the wall beside the door read, Provecta. That was all. No slogan etched in Latin, no detail about whatever lay within. No warning. The door wasn't even locked, which left Dr. Gregson giddy and the rest of us unnerved. I told myself that the steel doors above had been the barriers, that I shouldn't have expected a slim wooden door to be secure in any way. But when that door swung outwards, and the wood creaked, the sound reverberated through both the tunnel behind us and the vast space beyond. That 1,000 acres of darkness known as the city of Provecta. As we spilled through the opening, our 24 torch beams cut through that black air, revealing a wasteland of buildings and a cobblestone street ahead, shooting directly through the middle of the city. It bore a rusty signpost a few yards from the entrance, reading, Main Street. On either side of this ancient road, black husks of 2-story homes stood. Hollow burnt structures, stone-bricked ruins, with all wooden components lost to rot or flames. It all told part of a dreadful story from the past. But what sparked a round of gasps was that something shone in the distant darkness. Not the farthest extremities of our torch beams, but the distant lights of Provecta. Yellow specks clumped together in the city center, the inner city's sparsely lit island of life surrounded by acres that formed the outer city's corpse. Life, Dr. Cyleleghorn, Gregson's colleague, whispered in awe. The lights outlasted life, Georgina claimed, dashing the scientist's dream. The machinery was built to sustain itself, that's all, Dr. Ware. And it's the primary reason for this project, Dr. Gregson said. Mr. Proton's source of infinite power, whatever it may be, does not deserve to die here. It shouldn't have ever been hidden from the world above. Director Blum has ordered that we are under no circumstances to leave without it. 200-meter-tall buildings stood at the center of the city. Tower of stacked windows revealing still-lit floors. Steel scrapers, given that their tops neared not sky, but reinforced beams of Provecta's concrete ceiling. One of the largest concrete structures on Earth. Another astounding feat that, given the time period of the city's construction, left me with a hot sting in my stomach. Nothing about that underworld sat well with me. We don't know that the city is empty, I said quietly. I was certain that not all sounds came from us, the 30 or so explorers clicking and clacking their feet against the road. Some of the noises sounded from the distance, from somewhere deep within the city. As much as I wanted to believe that the sounds were coming from buildings settling or old machinery chugging and churning away, I felt life in those occasional far-off noises. Dr. Gregson turned and shone his torch at me, whilst still pressing forwards. Mr. Walter, I hired you and Mrs. Pendle to consult me as engineers, not historians. I was thinking of an appropriate response when one laborer's torch caught a stone wall barricading the street ahead, the line which separated the dark outskirts of the city from the somewhat lit center, the only remaining life in Provecta's skeleton. However, standing between us and the promised land was a 6-feet-tall barrier topped with a wooden platform. And on a steel plaque affixed to the stone-bricked wall were the words, "No men." One of the laborers was hoisted up by 2 others, and she began to pull the ladder down from the wooden platform, A couple minutes later, once we had all climbed across the wall, I saw the city center more clearly. Main Street continued for another quarter mile before reaching a large T-junction, its far side lined with 4 large towers of various sizes. There shone patchy light from windows and lampposts ahead, though most of the city still remained in blackness. But it was something that indicated this, at one point, had been a city of the future, one brimming with life, existing beneath a world that struggled to catch up. Georgina's scream pulled us all to a halt. Torch beams shot towards her, acting as stage spotlights, illuminating my colleague's weak, jittery forefinger as it jabbed towards a home second-floor window about 50 yards ahead. "What?" I asked, placing a tender hand on her shoulder. I felt Georgina's tensing muscles as she whimpered. "There was a woman." Dr. Gregson lifted an eyebrow. "I beg your pardon?" "In the window," she croaked as we all squinted at the glass pane in question. "I saw somebody watching us." "It's dark and the light is playing tricks on you," Gregson sharply explained, before mumbling something about incompetency and continuing to walk. There sounded other murmurs of uncertainty from other members of the team, but everyone followed the project leader nonetheless. We passed pristine 2-century-old buildings, some lit and others not, on our journey toward the tallest steel scraper. I was so close to finding the words, the perfect combination of words to put my anxious co-worker at ease. But my tongue caught against my teeth as I reflexively bit down, drew blood, and winced in pain. I had seen a black shape flit across the road ahead. "What was that?" Dr. Weir screamed, jumping backwards along with several of the laborers. "That wasn't a fucking shadow," a worker cried as he turned on his heel. Then, that same man uttered a shrill screech. Most of us spun around and joined them in crying. Shapes were slowly moving from the stone wall towards us, blocking our exit, figures in black robes of cotton. And below one's black, drooping hood, our torch beams revealed a lower face so nearly human, but horribly disfigured. It bore broad, flared nostrils and lips far too wide. There came no command from Dr. Gregson. Instead, chaos ruled as the members of our team dashed in all directions. Georgina Pendle and I followed Dr. Gregson's small collective forwards, given that there were no figures ahead. And as we dotted up Main Street, beelining towards the key steel scraper, there came screams from our fleeing colleagues. There came screams from my own lips too, as I started to consider what fates might have befallen those behind us. But I knew when the screams began to die, giving way to crunches and splatters, that no escapees had succeeded. When the group of survivors finally reached the high-rise, 2 laborers burst through the entrance's empty frame, one that had clearly once housed wooden doors before rot took hold. The building's lobby was lit by oval-shaped bulbs hanging from the wooden ceiling above, and a stone sign clung to the wall ahead. It read, "Provecta's Institution of Research." Dr. Gregson didn't let us linger in that space. He seemed to know the building's layout, for he led us to a hallway on the right-hand side of the lobby, one that led into the heart of the research center. I turned one last time before we disappeared into that corridor and looked out of the building's entrance. I saw shapes of various colors on the cobblestones of Main Street behind. Flat, resting shapes. Some twitching, others still, all painted red. Dr. Gregson led us through a side door to a staircase, and we began to climb. As we spiraled upwards, muffled thuds resonated from within the building, a telltale sign that we weren't alone. "I'm going to make a call," Mr. Hanley said as we burst onto the 4th floor. "Here!" Dr. Gregson cried triumphantly, barging through another empty doorway. "Dr. Gregson?" I began, following the man as he scooped a remarkably well-preserved book off a dusty desk. "Why, this is only at most a couple of decades old," he whispered, stroking the leather cover of the book lovingly. "Do you understand? It was printed recently, Dr. Waite. They must have continually revisited and reprinted Mr. Boughton's original work. New historians, engineers, and scientists. That means those figures on Main Street, They were people. No signal, Mr. Hanley interrupted, wafting his satellite phone angrily as footsteps sounded along both sides of the corridor. We're on our own, Gregson, and everyone knows it. They're scattering. Is there another way out of here? Away from Main Street, I mean. The expert ignored him, smiling as he flicked through the book's pages. This is everything we need. Hanley, Georgina, and I gathered in the small room, a neglected wooden-walled office that hadn't been touched in years. We stood behind the doctor, who clutched the book tightly to his chest and stared out of the window at the dark city beyond, and its concrete sky overhead, at the occasional dancing shadows flitting across alleys in the distance. So much life, Gregson whispered hungrily. Listen, Hanley said, stepping forward and putting a hand on his shoulder. We're not going that way. Show us how else to get out of here. Now! The doctor shrugged him off and spun around. We must get this book out of here. We must get us out of here, Hanley qualified, but grumbled and nodded as Gregson pushed past, leading the four of us out of the small office. Someone must have been on the verge of saying something, telling Dr. Gregson to get a hold of himself, but a slight creak brought all of our heads and torches spinning to the left. My thumping chest stilled when I saw only an empty hallway to the side. But then, the rim of my torch beam bulged inwards, only ever so slightly. Something cut into the light from above, and when I fearfully lifted my light upwards, it revealed twitching legs dangling from the ceiling. The blood-stained body of Dr. Wade was slipping through an open panel in the ceiling. But what made me scream until my lungs caved were those horrible green eyes surveying me from the dark hole above, watching as it dragged the limp, bloody body out of sight. Help, she gurgled through blood. What haunted me most about that creature was its slowness, for it had nothing to fear, no need to pull its prey quickly away, as it knew we would not stop it. I whined in terror as Wade gasped please to the four of us as she disappeared into the blackness. Then, the green eyes vanished into the dark, and a wooden panel scraped across to fill the hole. We need to leave, Dr. Gregson finally admitted, tossing the book to me. That'll fit in your rucksack, won't it, Mr. Walter? Georgina blubbered, eyes flitting to all angles. They're everywhere. Then, like a church mouse, Gregson began to run back towards the staircase, and the rest of us followed him down the stairs, then into the lobby. There, we found a haunting row of black hoods outside the building, blocking the exit. They did not pursue. They were calm and collected, like that creature in the ceiling, which unsettled me greatly. Gregson led us down the corridor to the back of the building. We found ourselves following a twisting and turning route of alleyways, a cobblestone ginnel maze that felt disturbingly small and misplaced in such a grand city center. Of course, what truly made those winding alleyways feel disturbing was the sudden quietness of the city. No more distant thuds and clangs. I preferred knowing that the horrors were far away. We found our way to a scarcely lit side road, away from Main Street, and bounded towards another segment of the stone wall, a barrier which undoubtedly formed an unbroken circle around that illuminated heart of the city, separating the heart of Mr. Broughton's new society from the old world of men. Oh no, Georgina whimpered as the three of us started to climb over the stone barrier. I heard it too, skittering from all around, from rooftops and alleys, most unsettling, from the dark interiors of the charred buildings along that cobblestone street ahead. And when we dropped back down the road, finding ourselves on the other side, Dr. Thomas Gregson made the mistake of casting his torch up to the source of commotion, to the clattering roof tiles of a small house beside us. Atop those slats was a man. Well, a once man. I know no other way to describe it, even after seeing it in the harsh glare of our 3 torch beams. A man, dark hood lowered onto his back, with pale flesh coated in rucks, folds that made his skin look too loose for his frame. A frame that was still unimaginably bulky, and the man had double the limbs, 4 arms, 4 legs. Before I processed the very nature of such a thing's existence, it scuttled across the tiles on all 8s. Then it hissed and jumped off the roof's edge, plummeting towards Dr. Gregson's frozen form. But Mr. Hanley threw himself in the way, pushing Gregson behind him, and caught the full brunt of the creature's attack. The lead laborer shrieked as the clawing began, as the once man tore into his victim's frail human body with 20 fingernails. Georgina and I, faces coated in tears and terror, wrenched our faces away, turned to avoid the awfulness of Mr. Henley's fate, a man whose first name I never even learned. Then my colleague and I found the courage to flee rather than freeze. Dr. Thomas Gregson, however, did not follow. As my colleague and I darted down the side street, slipping through the blackness towards freedom, Georgina's torch clattered to the cobblestones, fell from her hand in our feverish escape, and I was left to light the way with the sole remaining torch between the pair of us. But mere moments later, those two sets of footsteps became one. I knew I should keep pressing forwards, but I wouldn't, and when I turned to see Georgina standing still in the darkness, I was initially relieved to find her there, to find her simply quivering on the spot. "Come on," I urged, spare hand outwards for her to take. But Georgina eyed me absently, and very slowly shook her head before spluttering violently. Then came red droplets from both her twitching lips and the center of her white shirt. 20 fingers, sprouting from the darkness behind my dear friend, walked around the outer edges of her midsection. It was as if a crowd of people were clutching her body, but I knew that only one of those wretched things was behind her. One was enough. The appendages yanked Georgina Pandal back into the darkness, dragged her at unthinkable speed beyond the farthest reach of my torch beam, and I was alone. There came more skitters, more shapes moving at the outer reaches of my torch's glow, a glow that seemed to be shrinking, filling with the black shadows of those things moving towards me, encircling the last victim, the last human. I turned and continued, at full pelt, along that side street, knowing that I was only 100 yards away from the front wall of Provecta. Tried not to focus on the horrors revealed by my torch's light. Bloodstains spelling the same two words of revulsion on cracked windows. Filthy sapiens. Then I made it to the far wall, flew so eagerly into it that my face slammed into the concrete before my hands. Of course, I quickly shook off the pain and followed the wall towards Main Street. Only another 30 yards or so along, I found the door, and as I turned to shut it, I saw one of those terrible 8-limbed things. Saw it eyeing me with its hood up, covering all but a sly smile on its face. It could have pursued me, could have burst through the wooden door, even after I slowly shut it. But it didn't. It eyed me with malevolence, with some hidden design locked behind its eyes. When I made it back to the surface, I did not contact anyone. I ran, ignoring all calls from all organizations. I had to know Provecta's history before they took the book from me. Perhaps ignorance would have been better. I read that in the mid-1900s, the city's cracks began to show. Cracks both figurative and literal. In 1941, a bomb struck the ground above the city, shaking the ceiling of Provecta and causing several buildings to collapse. One building, the city's air treatment facility, was compromised. Even that underworld paradise did not escape the effects of the Second World War, and that only bolstered folk like Dr. Isaac Grant, a scientist along with Provecta politicians who despised their ancestors in the world above, sought ways to distance themselves from humanity, ways to turn mankind into something new. Dr. Grant wanted the inhabitants of Provecta to do more than simply adapt to the lessened air quality of their underground dwelling. He wanted to create a new race of people. The political conditions were, at long last, perfect. Fear ruled the minds of many Provecta citizens. Hundreds upon hundreds of people submitted to Dr. Grant's trials. They were genetically altered to survive on less food and oxygen, to see better in the dark, to be stronger and faster. Mutations followed, of course, but Grant explained that it was only to be expected. After all, they were no longer human. Thus the war began between the genetically altered and those who were unwilling to evolve. No men were allowed beyond the stone barrier erected around the city center. All humans were driven into the outskirts, and they were cut off from the core resources at the heart of the city. No power, no food. And after desegregation, there came violence, burnt houses, blood. The abominations tore the humans limb from limb. One of Dr. Grant's passages stands out. We must realize the dream of our forefathers. And it is clear now that they wanted us to end what came before. End mankind.